I know that these recordings have much more of an echo. I'm in a much bigger house than I normally live in, normally record in. So I blame my father-in-law for getting such a nice house for spring break. But here's what we've got. Now, Japan had occupied the Korean peninsula going back to the early 1900s. But after they were defeated, they withdrew. And so the victorious allies basically each sort of chose a different part of the Korean peninsula, much like you saw in Germany. So the Soviets got above the 38th parallel, and the Americans got below the 38th parallel. So you're going to see the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, above the 38th parallel. And the Americans are going to help, the Republic of Korea, aka South Korea. And so by 48, basically you've got these sort of two, regimes, the Soviet and Americans, and they withdraw, okay? And it's going to be sort of like, hey, North and South Korea, you're on your own, okay? So in mid 1950, the North Koreans overrun the 38th parallel into South Korea. Now, they were encouraged by the Soviet Union and neighboring communist China, and they quickly forced the South Koreans into a retreat. Within 3 days, Seoul, which is the South Korean capital, is captured, and basically, all the South Korean soldiers are in trouble. Now, Truman looked at the situation and said, this must have been encouraged by the Soviets. And he makes a critical decision. Without consulting the Joint Chief of Staff, who are his military leaders, or Congress, who are the only ones who have the ability to declare war, he decides to wage war through the backing of the United Nations, again, an organization that is only 5 years old, rather than seeking a declaration of war from Congress. He figured that, this sort of ongoing debate over a war in Korea would take so long that basically, communists would overrun democratic South Korea that quickly. So there was an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. And in that case, they censured the North Korean breach of peace, okay? That's, not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things. But by sheer coincidence, the Soviet delegation, which held a veto power in the Security Council, was boycotting the council because of the failure to recognize communist China as official China as opposed to Taiwan. So had the Soviets been there, they would have clearly said, we're not going to take action, against, this communist aggression that we basically support. But since they weren't there, the Security Council actually is able to call on, all UN members to furnish assistance to help South Korea repel this armed attack. Truman orders, the United States air, naval, and ground forces into action and brings Douglas MacArthur, who had been, the hero in Japan in terms of rebuilding. He'd been a hero in World War II in the Pacific Theater. He's going to get to be the supreme commander of the UN forces. So this is basically a U.S.-led contingent of the United Nations. Everybody sees it as the United States, even though technically it's not really a war, okay? Because Truman sets an interesting precedent. He decides that it's a war rather than a vote of Congress. And so he dodged this question of is it a war? Is it not a war? By calling it a police action. So it was a UN police action pretty much led entirely by the United States. And for the first few months of fighting, it goes very badly for South Korea and the UN forces. So in the fall of 1950, the South Korea is barely hanging on. And then there's this brilliant maneuver by MacArthur where he has this surprise amphibious landing where he goes from Busan in the south all the way up to Incheon, which is up near the 38th parallel. And all of a sudden, this, South Koreans with the UN are able to cross that 38th parallel. And that's really important because technically they have now repelled the North Koreans all the way back to their starting point. And the South Koreans recapture Seoul, which is important. And MacArthur becomes very overconfident. And he persuades Truman to let him keep going, to push all the way up through North Korea. Containment not being enough. He wants to basically get rid of all of this red menace in the Korean peninsula all the way up to China. Now, within a month, the U.S. forces are about to capture the North Korean capital, But Truman is concerned. He's like, listen, if we do this, this could provoke communist China to enter the war. So he flies 7,000 miles into the Pacific to meet at Wake Island, to meet face-to-face with MacArthur. And he says, listen, we can't push any further. And at the meeting, MacArthur dismisses Chinese threats to intervene. He's like, listen, yeah, they might be on the border right now, but they're not coming. Well, the same day, the communist government in Beijing says China will not sit idly by as their North Korean allies are humiliated. So, within days, okay, U.S. forces enter the North Korean capital, and then all of a sudden, as they sort of cross the Yalu River, that's sort of North Korea's border with China, MacArthur's like, this is going to be over soon. We'll have this done in a few months. But he is completely wrong, because right around Thanksgiving, 300,000 Chinese volunteers counterattack. So just as Truman had predicted, and just as MacArthur had said wouldn't happen, they push down from China, and they send, the U.S. troops, really the UN troops, but the U.S. troops in just this desperate retreat. And they recapture Seoul, and MacArthur's totally unprepared. And his response is, I want atomic bombs and I want bombers to be able to attack China. And people in Washington, D.C. are freaked out, okay? And Truman is like, what are we going to do? And then the other shoe drops. MacArthur undermines the president by issuing an ultimatum, okay, for China to make peace or suffer an attack. And you're like, what? Where is he coming from? And then on the floor of Congress, the Republican minority leader reads a letter from MacArthur that criticizes the president for being cowardly and basically says there's no substitute for victory. And this is such obvious insubordination. And Truman had two choices. He could either accept MacArthur's aggressive demands, which he didn't want to do, or fire him. And so Truman actually removes this great war hero, MacArthur. And MacArthur is the only five-star general at the time, and it completely divides the nation. So 2/3 of Americans initially opposed Truman's firing, but all of the top military leaders realized that it needed to happen. This sort of open insubordination would never work. And so they agree. But it's a big deal that Truman does this, okay? Now, in June of 1951, so all of this stuff is happening, the Soviet representative basically says at the United Nations, can we just have a ceasefire along the 38th parallel, which was the original dividing spot. Negotiations are going to take about 2 years, and I'm going to go into that in more detail later on, but Truman has left office by the time these negotiations are over. Eisenhower is the president. No peace treaty is ever signed, okay? So basically, just sort of agree to a tie, this armistice, and Korea, like Germany, remains divided. It's an inconclusive war. More than 30,000 Americans die. More than 100,000 are wounded or missing. South Koreans lose 2 million people. North Koreans and the Chinese lose 3 million people. But at the end of the day, to most Americans, this North Korean attack on South Korea had provided concrete proof that there was an international communist conspiracy guided by the Soviet Union to control the world. And Truman's assumption that Stalin and the Soviets were behind the invasion sort of just made it more important for Americans to be committed to stopping communism. And at the same time, Truman was also worried that the Soviets would use what was going on in Korea as a diversion to invade Western Europe. So he uses that as an opportunity to order a major expansion of U.S. military forces in Europe and around the world. This is where it gets interesting. He even increases aid to French troops fighting the communist independence movement in Indochina, namely Vietnam. So as a result of what's going on in Korea, there's actually going to be starting an investment in Vietnam that is going to go not just from Truman to Eisenhower. It's going to go from Eisenhower to Kennedy. It's going to go from Kennedy to LBJ. It's going to go from LBJ to Nixon, and even sort of the very end to Ford, okay? So now we're in Eisenhower's presidency, and it's important to understand that he's very different than Truman. Eisenhower had actually been, a great military hero. He'd been the hero of World War II, of D-Day, up with Ulysses S. Grant and Washington as these great military leaders who become president. But the important guy you have to take into account is his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. And they're going to sort of change the overall approach to the Cold War. To them, containment is not going to be enough. In their mind, particularly Dulles's mind, the United States needed to develop what he thought was this dynamic foreign policy that would, quote unquote, roll back communism. So no longer was there going to be the goal to contain, but instead to, quote, liberate those people under communist rule. So to roll back communism means to go to where communism already is and remove it, as opposed to containment, which was simply to make sure it didn't get there, okay? And I know that we've just talked about ending the Korean War, but it's important to understand actually how it ended. Dulles did not want peace until China had really been punished. And Eisenhower told Dulles that he was not willing to prolong this military effort, but he was willing to use the threat, if not actually use nuclear weapons, to break this impasse. And so Eisenhower intensifies the aerial bombardment of North Korea to sort of get these negotiations finally to an end, and he lets it be known that he might use nuclear weapons if there's not a truce that comes. And ultimately, China realizes that they've taken so many losses, and in fact, the Soviets lose Joseph Stalin in early 1953. So whether it was the threat of nuclear weapons, whether it was Chinese losses, whether it was Stalin dying, all of that comes together, and you're ultimately going to get this, truce in 53, where you basically agree, all right, we're right back where we started. Now, to get a better sense of John Foster Dulles, who had this, in some ways, sort of this Wilsonian morality, again, both their parents had been Presbyterian ministers, he insisted that containing communism was immoral because it didn't actually free anybody from oppression. And in his mind, this America city on a hill should work towards the liberation of what he called captive peoples, both in Eastern Europe and in China. Now, Eisenhower sort of looked at him as like, we can't use the military to go do this because that'll involve us all over the world. Instead, he wanted to use as much peaceful means as possible. Now, Eisenhower understood that the United States could not win a ground war against the Soviet Union or China, who had armies that were way bigger than the United States. Now, he also understood that you couldn't keep up this sort of military expenditures at the level that the Korean War had been. So they instead relied on something called massive retaliation, which was their idea of getting the biggest bang for their buck. Now, they wanted to use the threat of nuclear warfare to prevent communist aggression. Now, they were going to use something that's not talked about in Tyndall called strategic air command. They wanted planes that flew fast and could drop bombs that would actually sort of create this, maximum deterrent. So, listen, we got bombs, we're willing to use them, and we'll drop them on you, so that should stop you from your aggression. Now, there are major weaknesses, obviously, at this, because the Soviets have a bomb as well, and this idea of mutually assured destruction could mean that basically everybody dies. Now, Dulles liked this. He actually called this idea brinksmanship, which his idea was this sort of game of nuclear chicken, that if you were willing to go to the verge of war, the other side would back down. Now, critics looked at this and they're like, excuse me, the goal should not be to get as close to war as possible because then we could have war. But in Dulles's mind, this was the way that you could actually stare down the Soviets and win. Now, the other major key to Dulles and Eisenhower's plan was the newly founded CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which were going to be spies around the world. So actually, what I'll tell you is that the whole idea that they had was spies in skies. So we're going to have fast planes that could drop bombs. We're going to have spies on the ground. And their goal was to manipulate world politics in covert ways to sort of get what they wanted. And it's important to understand that sort of as a result of World War II, you have anti-colonial independence movements all around the world, and particularly against the French and the British, who had these colonial empires. And so we're going to see these hot spots that the United States gets itself involved in the next lecture.